Another member of KTIB's multifaceted staff over the past 50 years is Roy Pugh. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Roy's voice was heard doing Nickel State sports in addition to engineering duties and countless other on-air roles. Let's listen to his memories of KTIB. How are you today, Roy?
I'm doing good, William. How about yourself?
Well, like I said, we wanted to get with you and get reacquainted with everything going on in your life. How's everything in Florida?
Well, we're like you. We're getting quite a bit of rain, but other than that, beach is still white, and it's Florida. You know, it's pretty nice.
Where were you originally from?
Well, I was born and raised in Virginia, a little town called Kilmarnock, which is about halfway between Washington, D.C. and Norfolk. It's on the western side of Chesapeake Bay.
Mm-hmm. Now, growing up, were you always a fan of broadcasting?
Well, I always listened to radio, like all teenagers and that sort of thing, and enjoyed. I remember in those days, of course, everything was AM, and I used to listen to KTIB out of Buffalo, New York. It was a 50,000 water, and it beamed up and down the East Coast, and so at night you could listen to that. And I listened to that quite a bit, and a number of the other 50,000 waters, WABC out of New York, you got a good signal at night and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I guess I listened to radio an awful lot when I was a youngster.
Did you go to college?
No, I did not. When I got out of high school, I went right into broadcasting. I went to DJ school down in Norfolk, Virginia, and then went to work at a radio station about 30 miles from my hometown in Warsaw, Virginia, WNNT. And I worked there for about 3 years, I guess, and then enlisted in the Navy. And after pulling 4 years in the Navy, got out and went to electronic school and got my first-class engineer's license, and then went back to WNNT and worked there for about 3 more years. That's when I started doing play-by-play, and that was what led me to come to Thibodeau. I was doing high school play-by-play and had the opportunity to apply for a job there at KTIB and do Nickel State sports. And at the time, the station was owned by Mr. Block and Mr. Jackson and Mr. Lawson, and they brought me in, and I worked for them for about a year before Mr. Sadie and his partners, Mr. Pugh-KTIB and Mr. Watkins, bought the station in 74, I guess it was.
Okay. Now, I tell you what, it's quite a long way to go from Virginia to Thibodeau, Louisiana. Did you basically contact them first about working down here?
Yes, I saw an advertisement in Billboard or Broadcasting, I guess it was, and sent them a resume and a tape, and they brought me in, and my wife and I had a 6-month-old child at the time, and Mr. Block brought me in, and it's kind of funny now because we look back at it. He told me the station was for sale. Well, then he offered me the job, and my wife and I talked about it, and we didn't tell either of our parents. We just said, well, we'll take a chance. We'll move. So we were really kind of taking a chance, and we may get there and the station would be sold and we wouldn't have a job. But as it turned out, they sold the station, and Mr. Sadie kept me on, and I worked for him for 16, 17 years.
Wow. Now so you come down to Thibodeau and make it your home, and I always ask this of a lot of people who aren't from here originally. Did you go through culture shock with the way some of the people talk down here?
Well, a little bit, but I had the advantage of being around the water. My father was a waterman, so I was very much aware of seafood and things such as that. But as far as French, I knew nothing. And what was kind of funny was when we moved there, in the old days there was quite a bit of the French culture left in the radio business in the fact that we did obituaries on the air, on the 7:30 news. Well, you can imagine me trying to look at bourgeois and pronounce it if I had no background on that. Everything I did for the first 6 months was phonetical, so I could get through it. But it wasn't long before I, picked it up and learned it on it.
Okay, so then, of course, you just mentioned Mr. Sadie's group had bought the station about a year into your working at KTIB. What were your impressions when you first met Mr. Sadie?
Well, I knew him because he owned KHOM. So we were in competition with him. So he knew me and I knew him as far as that was concerned. And Marie Bergeron, who was at KTIB at the time, had worked for him because Mr. Sadie at one time had managed KTIB prior to my getting there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, it wasn't that was not a problem. And of course, when I went to work for him, I knew he was a very, very successful radio man because he had taken KHOM at FM at the time and made it successful, and there were no successful FMs hardly anywhere. So I knew he knew his radio, and obviously he did.
All righty. Now, you mentioned, of course, all the years you were here, and, of course, a large part of that covering being the voice at Nickel State Sports. And I take it, did you cover all their major sports? I
did all 3 sports. I broadcast. I sent out a figure out one time, and just generally it was somewhere in excess of 850 games that I did.
Wow. So let's talk about football first. And all the years you did that, any real memories stick out in covering the Colonel's football squad?
Well, probably the 2 main ones were 1975 when we won the Gulf South Conference Championship. And we won it not only that year in football, we won it in basketball, baseball, and tennis, which was kind of unheard of. And we really should have gone to the playoffs that year. We got passed over. It's still been a craw in everybody's gullet that we were passed over. The team that came in second to us in the league got the NCAA bid, and when we called, and I called from the radio station polling the panel that made the decision, one of the guys said, well, y'all have only had football 4 years. There's just no way you could be that good. That was his excuse for picking the second-place team.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a great year. We really, we had kids that had started the outset of football there and had gotten their brains beat out as freshmen and sophomores, and then by the time they were seniors, they were really good, and it was really great that they were rewarded with that. And then I guess the next one was in the 80s when we went to the NCAA playoffs and beat Appalachian State, and then the next week we had to go to Georgia Southern and ran into Tracy Ham, who was everybody's All-American, and they beat us, and they went on and won the national championship. That was probably our finest year.
Of course, I believe that was 1986 when that was going on.
Yeah, and we had Mark Carrier and Strapolo, and we had quite a ball club. We really did have a good team that year.
With the Connell brothers on defense.
Right.
Doug Hudson.
Doug Hudson, who was from about 6 miles from where I live right now.
Wow.
He was from Gulf Breeze, Florida.
Wow. Now, then I want to go back to 75 because some of the young people may forget that one key guy, a part of that football team who later had success with Kansas City, Gary Barbaro.
Gary Barbaro was an outstanding player. He played cornerback his first year. He played quarterback his sophomore year because he was the best athlete on the team. And then in his last 2 years, he went over to safety and was an All-American and went on and played pro ball, was just an outstanding football player.
And you mentioned Mark Carrier just now. A good handful of Nichols players had opportunities in the pros. Some of them, of course, lasted longer than others. I also think about Oscar Tuggle.
That's right.
And one gentleman you might remember who played at Nichols and then briefly went on to the Saints and the CFL, Greg Harding.
That's right. Greg was a safety or a cornerback, I've forgotten which, but a very, very good player. And we had a couple of players, I'm trying to pull the name out of my hat. We had one that went to the Washington Redskins and played a number of years, a defensive back.
Was that Darryl Pounds?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, and hopefully we won't offend anybody in case we skip somebody. There's so many great players over the years you covered.
We had some outstanding players that we really had.
And then let's go to basketball. And Nichols, what are your more fond memories of the basketball team?
Well, we had a number of very good years. I guess the very best being, in the must have been late 80s when we went to the NCAA, played University of Virginia in the first round. We never got past the first round because every time we would go somewhere, we would always wind up with a 14 seed, so you're playing a number 3 or something like that. That was once we got in Division I. In Division II, under Don Landry and Jerry Sanders, we had several really, really good teams. And, of course, the best player in the history of Nichols basketball was Larry Wilson from Raceland. And we just had some outstanding years in 75, 76 in that area there.
A little bit later, a gentleman who was one of my teachers at Nichols State was a pretty good ball player, Cleveland Hill.
Yeah, Cleveland was one of the real stars at Nichols State. I never, when I started doing play-by-play, was 1973, and Cleveland had graduated, I believe, the year before. But I knew him real well. He was an assistant coach for a while with Don Landry and Jerry Sanders, and has been around the university for a long, long time, and, I mean, you just can't find a finer gentleman.
And I believe a gentleman who stayed in Thibodeau and I believe became a car salesman later on, Shelby Hypolite?
Yeah, Hippolyte.
Chippolite.
Yeah, Shelby was an outstanding player. He played with Larry Wilson and a number of the other guys. I mean, they had some really fine teams. We were a powerhouse in the old Gulf South Conference in those days.
All righty, and now let's move on to baseball, the great American pastime. I'm sure there's a few memories for yourself when it came to covering the Colonels there.
Absolutely. Well, the field, of course, is named Ray Didier Field. When I came there, Mr. Didier was still the head coach. He had great teams. Came in second in the nation one year when we were in Division II. Then he kind of turned it over to T.C. Calmes, who coached for a number of years and won the Gulf South Conference. He finished first or second in the conference every year that he was a coach, I believe. And then he was also an assistant football coach. And then Mike Knight took over, and Mike was a coach there for quite a number of years.
Right. So it sounds like overall you had a pretty rewarding experience as part of the broadcast.
I loved it. I really did. I loved all of the sports. I really enjoyed doing them all. But baseball was without a doubt my favorite. I had such a good time. And I laughingly say when I first started doing baseball, you'd get on the bus and the kids were like your younger brother. And they would go, Roy, after curfew tonight, we're going to sneak out and go over here and get a pizza. You want to go with us, Well, towards the end of my broadcast career, when I would get on the bus, somebody would get up from one of the front seats and go, Mr. Pugh, would you like to sit here? So I knew it was time to get out.
Wow. Well, now, of course, all the years you're part of KTIB, a lot of good people you worked with up on the second floor of Green Street as well. And I'm going to try to go down.
Hurricanes up there.
Oh, yeah. I've gone through 2 already myself. And we got hopefully I'll remember my list. I left it on the side, but quite a few people. Let's mention the name you mentioned earlier in Marie Bergeron.
Well, Marie was there when I got there. Actually, she wasn't at KTIB. She was at KHOM, but she had been at KTIB previously and went to KHOM with Mr. Sadie and then came back when he bought it. So Marie has been around radio in the Thibodeau area for 40 years, I guess.
And another gentleman who established himself very well in the news department, Roy Vicknair.
Yep, Roy. Now, Roy didn't work at KTIB very much. He started at KTIB and went over to KHOM, and he stayed at KHOM primarily. He did a little at KTIB, but not a lot.
Okay. Now, when you were there, because I don't remember the timeline, was there a gentleman who was an announcer there named Hugh Smith?
Hugh Smith was the station manager when I arrived there. And he was the manager and the engineer. And he stayed there. I worked with Hugh for about a year, and then when Mr. Sadie took over, he became the manager.
Now, of course, the gentleman who I believe would wind up succeeding you in the world of sports, Darren Fox.
That's right. Darren did. Darren followed me up and did play-by-play for a number of years, along with doing the morning show like I did.
All righty. Off the top of my head, am I forgetting anybody that really stands out?
Well, yeah, Jimmy Cole was the program director for us when we were country there for, I'm going to guess now, Jimmy was probably with me for 10 years. He left and went on and went over to Lafayette in that area. And the last I heard, he had left Lafayette and was in Indiana or Illinois somewhere as a program director of a pretty large station up there.
So I'd say pretty credible. Now let's go back to talking about what you just mentioned. So many news stories that popped up along the way, and you mentioned some of those hurricanes. When you ever been through a tropical system before?
Yeah, living in on the coastal part of Virginia, Hurricane Hazel, when I was a kid, came right over my house. In fact, we went out and secured my dad's boat during the eye. So I was familiar with hurricanes and had been through 5 or 6 of them, I guess, along the East Coast.
Okay, now, of course, a lot of news stories as well broke along the way, and we could go forever just talking about tropical systems. But one I do remember, I'm pretty sure I listened to your voice the early morning hours this happened, was in the early 80s, the story of the poison water scare in Lafourche Parish.
Yeah, we did a lot of that coverage. In fact, our strength at KTIB all those years really was that we were a local radio station. We had the best local news staff there was. We had any number of people leave our news department and go on to bigger things. Margaret Dubuisson, who became an anchor in New Orleans for television, was a Nichols student and started with us on a part-time basis, and they came full-time. And we had a number of folks that worked in our news department. Marie Bajoran had headed that for all those years. I mean, she was just superb, and Marie did more election coverage, and you could shake a stick out of her courthouse. The management stayed pretty steady. Like I said, Marie was there for 30, 40 years, and I was there for 18. But most everybody else liked radio. The grass is a little greener somewhere. Also, they get a chance to advance, and they do that. Mm-hmm. We had an outstanding engineer for a number of years, Ricky Benson, who really kind of built that radio station there. All of the equipment that was there the last time I was there, which was about a year and a half ago, Ricky had put in. We put in the new transmitter out north of town, and we also built the big 2,000-foot tower out of Vacherie for KTIB.
So many different news stories. I also remember in the 80s when y'all had to cover the Shriver Overpass collapse.
Yeah, that's right. There was a collapse there. We covered that, and of course everything had to be, secured. We had a Marty and a van at that time that really helped our news coverage, because we would drive as close as we could to any event like that, and then run the antenna up and broadcast it right back. People were very cognizant of the fact that if there was anything happening local news-wise, they didn't care about the music. They switched to KTIB because they knew we would be on top of the news market.
And one other story I do remember as a kid in the 70s when we had the at Lafourche Crossing, when we had the train derailment.
Yeah, we sure did.
And y'all covered that extensively.
Covered that, yeah, very, very heavily.
Right.
And of course we were on the air. It was a period of time when the AM was a daytime only. We didn't have any nighttime hours. Mm-hmm. And so we were allowed to stay on at night if a tropical storm came into the Gulf. And I remember the first storm that I was working on the board at the time, and a guy called me from Colorado saying that he was from the Morgan City area, and he was listening to us in Colorado.
Wow.
with 500 watts.
Incredible. Well, it's and of course, also while you were there, KTIB was fortunate enough to get a improved output, moved up to AM 640.
We were 630 before.
Right.
And once they got rid of the clear channel stations, we moved up just a tab, and of course could increase our power and went a little more directional and had some nighttime coverage and stuff.
Right, and of course for quite a long time while you were here, it was all country format as well.
Yeah, we were country. I don't remember the years. I would say probably we went country somewhere in the vicinity of 75 and stayed country until the late 80s.
Right, it was a pretty, and of course Mr. Sadie reminded me the other day, he felt it was the biggest mistake of his life when he changed formats when he did from country to easy listening. And
well, I'm not going to take any credit for that. He can take credit for that.
Yeah, and some people weren't too happy about it initially.
Well, he didn't make many mistakes, let me tell you. He was a great man to work for, and it was very rare that he made a mistake. He really was a brilliant radio.
Well, I guess the important question I need to ask now is, why did you decide to leave KTIB?
Well, I had an opportunity. I actually went to work for Nickel State as fundraiser there, and worked in the athletic department for 3 or 4 years. And then I had raised my family there, loved Thibodeau to death, and had an opportunity. We had always vacationed over here where I live now. Every year we vacationed Fort Walton to Destin in that general area. And 2 of my boys were older and in the military, and we had 1 still left at home, and we just decided, hey, instead of waiting to try to retire over there for the last few years, why don't we just move over there and work? And so that's what I did. I moved over here, and we've been here since 1994.
Well, one name I did forget, and I had it written somewhere else. I dug it out while you were speaking, and I bring up this name, kind of gives people a little bit of a chuckle, Les Domain.
Yeah, Les Domain worked for us for a few years. He worked at KTIB-AM in Houma, and came to work for us for a number of years and ran the swap shop, and then had some illness problems and had to get out of radio for a while.
And, of course, over the weekends, a lot of people had the opportunity to listen to Leroy Martin.
I was going to say, let's not forget Leroy. Leroy was working at the radio station when I came there and worked through every kind of format there can be. And there were times when I first went there, we were almost to the point of, I guess we were semi-pop, or in those days they used to call it middle of the road. And he did his Cajun show. We went to country, he did his Cajun show. If we were rock and roll, he did his Cajun show. And he was just a delight to work with. I loved it.
Well, I'll tell you what, it sounds like KTIB was one of the most rewarding experiences you had in your career, and it's good to know that even though you've been a little removed from the station, that a lot of those good memories are still fondly with you.
Well, they really are, and as a matter of fact, after I left and moved over here, we had an engineer named John Johnson out of New Orleans that did contract engineering for Raymond, and John would call me anytime there was because I had been the engineer for the last 3 or 4 years after Ricky Benson left, and finally got to put that first-class license that I studied for when I got out of the Navy to use, and John would call me anytime it was a 2-man job, and I'd come back over, and so every now and then I'd walk into KTIB, and things hadn't changed a whole lot.
Wow. Well, listen, we all of us here greatly appreciate your help in putting this special together, and we know that it's good to hear your voice again and all those good memories of both the world of sports and news, and especially of all the hours you put into this station to make it a better station for everyone.
Well, I love my time there. My kids all have tremendously fond memories of Thibodeau, and they all ask about, every time they come back, about going back over to Bubba's too and seeing Norm, which I know he doesn't own it anymore, but I think his son owns it now. And we just had great memories of raising our family there. And Mr. Block gave me the opportunity, and I'll never forget it. He was just a tremendous citizen of Thibodeau, and I really appreciate all he did for me and my family.
Roy Pugh, another distinguished member